There's no group in Europe has the bad press of the Vikings. If those, they're just terrible. The public relations, they're murderers, they're rapists, they're pirates, they're plunderers, they're alcoholics, they're just troublemakers. The reality is, it was nothing like that at all. It was the complete reverse. In fact, the Christians are more like that. If anything, the evidence shows that the Vikings were a better class of people, and I'm going to show you and prove it to you. Not just me. This is not just me, my personal statements. So, how did I get here? Well, when I was a schoolboy back in the mid 70s, 12, 13, 14, I was hearing about this thing called Wood Key on the news. Wood Key. What was Wood Key? What is Wood Key? Well, what happened was, and it's incredibly ironic, that the city government in Dublin started buying up all this land in the city centre. Oh, they left the buildings derelict. The idea was to buy it up cheap and build the new government buildings, new civic offices, council offices, all over government offices. And so they bought up the site during the 1960s, and in the early 70s they knocked down all the old buildings that were there, and they started to clear off the foundations. And what happened was one of the most amazing things ever. And a fully intact Viking city appeared out of the mud. Fully intact. I mean, it was in perfect shape. The streets were there. They were finding incredible quantities of artifacts. The houses were there. It was all there. And immediately they called the archaeologists from the National Museum of Ireland, and they said, go on down there, you do the usual thing, make sure you clean the site up. And the archaeologists were saying things like, this is in a world by itself. This is like the biggest thing, the biggest Viking discovery outside Scandinavia. It's an entire, fully intact city. It's all there. It's just been built on in the Middle Ages and then built on top of that. But it was all there. And they not only found artifacts, they found everyday objects. Now, at first the whole thing was all between the politicians in local government who were like, yeah, we'll do a wonderful job, we'll make the site nice, and we'll make sure everything is out before we bury it in concrete. And then the archaeologists were brought in as the experts. See, this is the whole thing. It's never us, it's always the government and the experts, and we're supposed to sit down and do nothing. That's for everything, from medicine, everything, like healthcare, everything. And so, what happened was, the ordinary people in the city were looking over this fence. That looks really interesting. What's that? And they were looking at archaeologists going, they're finding the most incredible, deep things. And the news would be reported more. Every report of the news, they found this, they found that. And so they opened it up to the public, and literally thousands of people went in and had a look. And the first thing they said was, no way can this be buried. This is just too important. But something very important happened. When they actually saw that the Vikings were not these guys with the horned helmets and the sword landing on the beach, chop everyone up and carry off the women, and saw their combs, the women's combs, and saw the utensils and the cooking things, and they even saw their shoes and little kids' clothes and shoes and everything. What happened then was, they realised, that's our people. That's our family. They're our ancestors. They're us. This is now it's family, now it's business, now it's personal. You're not going to get government to bury this thing in concrete. And so every Saturday between 1974 and 1979, people started protesting in the streets. First a few thousand. And by the time I got there, now I can remember, I don't know why I went, I was about 14, the big one in 1978. I was about 12, 13, 14. The big one, I don't know why I went on my own. I had to go, felt compelled, and I went on this big, huge march through the city. There was tens of thousands of people, housewives with babies, academics, even Catholic priests, even ordinary people from the country. People from Scandinavia came over, and they said, this thing cannot be buried, do not bury it. And so it was tied up in the courts, and it was tied up in all kinds of things like that. And what this happened was, and it awakened people's genetic memories, their genes. Like genetic memories, that's been proven, that's true. They give the person a heart transplant, And they started, there's a famous story of a woman who was a vegan or a vegetarian, and they gave her a heart transplant, and she suddenly had an interest in motorcycles, fried chicken, and beer. And she told her doctors about this, and then they found out that the person she got the heart from was a young biker dude who was killed in a bike accident. And there's loads of stories like that. That's why when you have a blood transfusion, they put you to sleep for so long, because you have two life forces inside you. And it would be very difficult for you and the other person or other people. So you wait until your life force assimilates this. So genetic memories are absolutely real. I think that's what people say, I have past life memories. I really think that's what it really is. It's in the genes. And so it awakened these people's genetic memories. And people were like, suddenly, people had but they told us in school the Vikings were here. That's basically what they said, they told us. And they came on an attack. And there was a big battle I'll talk about later, and they left. But they didn't tell us how well they'd settled and then how they'd intermarried with locals, and we all had Viking and Danish ancestors in us, anyone from the city. They never told us this, so it awakened those memories. People suddenly wanted to be Viking, very fashionable, became very interesting. So what happened was, there was a final court case, the government won, you can't beat City Hall, as they say, because they rigged the courts. And there was one last attempt by a bunch of poets and artists to occupy the site and to stop the machines coming in. And then one night in 1979, the police went in and took the last of the protesters out. Heavy machines came in at night, of course, start pouring the concrete and all this, and the City Hall was built. And spontaneously, thousands of people showed up that night with torches. On the night the trucks came in, they came from all over the city. And they gave the Viking site of Woodkey a funeral, a spontaneous Irish wake, we call it, a funeral, to say goodbye to the ancestors while they were buried again. But the thing happened, what happened was, they had uncovered a family secret they didn't want us to know about, but now we knew about it. And now, if you go to Dublin, Ireland, it's so on the map now. There's all kinds of Viking tours you can go on. There's lots of restaurants are named after local Viking leaders. There's all kinds of things like that. It's in the memory. It's part of the culture. Much more much more now than probably our Gaelic Celtic identity in Dublin, particularly. There's much more of that than there is of the Irish stuff. Because that's really what they really found in the city. Interesting. And that was probably why, because the power structure did not want us having a more, shall we say, diverse understanding of our heritage. Because then we're less likely to say, you're just an Irish person, that's the end of it. But if you understand you have all these different races and all these different cultures inside you, who are you going to fight with then? Who are you going to blame for your problems? Nobody. Now, this was what really happened, was that the Vikings became human. This is what really changed that. They suddenly went from the guys landing on the beach with the swords and hacking their way through to fellas and women who made things, did business, traded, built homes, had families, and settled down. They were just like any other people. They were not just like the TV series The Vikings, landing on the beach, hacking everyone up. It wasn't like that at all. Suddenly people were going, why were these guys portrayed as monsters if they had homes, families? This is all working well. So people were asking in their mind, but obviously, this doesn't make sense anymore. Now, everyday artifacts demonstrated the Vikings of Dublin were a living community of real people, not just crude fictional character stereotypes. A realization that they were also our people, coupled with a subconscious resentment that if we had denied this insight and this celebration of our own heritage, people were kind of annoyed too. And also the idea, it was firmly entrenched. And it happened a year later, I think, at York in England, Jorvik. And they were building a shopping centre there. And again, they found a very big Viking site. And once more, the same thing happened locally. And there's a big Viking thing in York now. It's a big Viking Nordic area. Simply because they discovered, hey, they're not cartoons, they're real people. They're real people just like us. Now, when you hear the term a Viking raid, they always make it sound like a pirates attacking or bandits Well, the word raid had a very, very different meaning back then. A raid was almost like a business deal. It could go bad, but you did everything to avoid it going bad. So, for instance, there's some very good Anglo-Saxon historic documents in England, where there's one particular fascinating document where it talks about a bunch of Vikings in England came into a town, in a village. Hard men, came out, all armed up, like two rapper gangs. Then the hard guy Viking came on, they walked up to them, and they said, "What do you want?" And they said, "Some money, some silver." And the Anglo-Saxons would sit around thinking about it. Do we take these guys on? They look hard. Would it be a good idea? No, because if they kill all of us, the village is vulnerable. Vikings would be looking at the Anglo-Saxon guys going, "Those two guys on the end, they look like they could kick our ass, they look hard. So let's negotiate a bit hard, a bit more soft with them, reduce the price. Instead of 100 pieces of silver, we'll ask for 75. Little councils, they look each other in the eyes, might be with a sword, this kind of thing, macho, typical men, kind of thing. And then they would, this is how 90% of these raids would end. The Anglo-Saxons would say, "Okay, you can have 75 pieces of silver and go." Now, there's two ways. If the Vikings were real criminals and real pirates, if they were to give them that money, the first thing a psychopath or a psychopathic type would say, "They've got more. Let's get it." That kind of thing. That's a real criminal thinks. Or an honourable person thinks on both sides. We solved this without a fight. No harm done. Maybe these guys want to trade. And then they would come back next year and say, "We were here last year, yeah. We got 75 pieces of silver off you. We've got a long ship filled with really nice woven fabric that the women in our country make. Would you like to buy it? Or swap it or sell it for pots or anything?" Yeah. That's what the raid was. It was, you should think about it. If you're sailing all the way from Norway to England or to Ireland or to anywhere like Greenland, you're not going to start America. You're not going to start a fight after all that trip. It's stupid. You never get, it's suicide. So you play a game, you negotiate. And then it works out. If both sides understand each other, are agreeable, well, then we have a relationship. Then we can work together. Then we can trade and sell and buy things. Hey, who even knows? We might even become friends. And that's what happened. That's exactly how it happened. So in 837 AD, 60 Viking dragon ships arrived in Dublin. They came into Dublin Bay. It was already a city here from ancient times. It was already been this. It was the Greeks had mentioned that there was a city already here, and they settled by a Norwegian trading force under King Turgesius. They then threw up a fort on a high ridge where Dublin Castle rose. The Irish from the outside of the city forced them to leave at force after a while. They came in. Now there was the Irish inside the city were like, "These guys are really impressive. They have these badass ships. They're coming in here. They seem to be agreeable." And it was working out fine, but Irish from outside the city had their own markets cut off. You understand? Suddenly the city wasn't trading with chieftains out here for cattle and sheep. It was trading with these guys from Norway. So these guys were pissed off and annoyed. So they went in and drove them out, drove the Norwegians out. Which would have annoyed the locals here because suddenly there was a new economy building up. So 17 years later, these guys went back and they must have spoken to people and said, "This place, Dublin, is great. It's got a really nice climate. It's got a beautiful bay, beautiful beach. It's got beautiful mountains here and huge forests here. And there's loads of business here. And there's plenty of good-looking women. And there's plenty of beer. And there's you can buy things from all around the country." And so they came back under the command of Olaf the White, and they set up a seat of government on the hill where Dublin Castle is, right there. And that's still the centre of government to this day in that area. And they built a permanent long fort, which is where they moored their Viking longships. And for trading silver and ivory, the Irish would be trading silver to the Vikings. The Vikings would be bringing in ivory. Now, it wasn't African elephant ivory. It was from, the wards, those guys in Greenland, like a big seal, and they have tusks. Those guys, and that was the main trade: silver out, ivory in. And it was also, then the economy boomed for lots of reasons, and they developed the Dublin Kingdom of Diplomas in here. So this was an established Viking kingdom. This not only happened in Dublin, it happened in Wexford, another city, Waterford, Cork, and Limerick, and a few other places. Now, so an economy boomed that not only served the locals and them, but also you had a new economy developed outside the city. So you had chieftains around the country who were fighting before this. They would have, when the battle was over, they would have had taken, the prisoners that were often killed before that, or sacrificed under the Gaelic laws, they could now sell them as slaves to the Norwegians and the Danish Vikings for money, so that a whole new economy was built up. Now, assimilation with the Gaelic Irish was completed. These are two quotes by hardcore academics. These are people who were in Cambridge University's Anglo-Saxon, Celtic and Norse studies. And it took 1,000 years to get to this point. But they're finally now admitting that the Vikings were not murderers, rapists and killers. They're finally admitting it. It only took 1,000 years now. But they're finally admitting it. And this is a comment by Dr. Fiona Edmonds of Cambridge University, Department of Anglo-Saxon, Norse and Celtic Studies. The latest evidence does not point to a simple opposition between Vikings and natives. Within a relatively short space of time and with lasting effects, the various cultures of Britain and Ireland started to intermingle. Investigating that process provides us with a historical model of how political groups can be absorbed into complex societies, contributing much to those societies. Now, how they were absorbed was trade. Like I said, in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, or Brick Lane in London, all the different races trading, trade brings people together. And this is Dr. Marina Manick of the same department. One Viking leader who settled in Ireland was honoured with praise poetry, dedicated to the rule by the indigenous community. Now let me tell you how significant this is. In Ireland, the poets are the highest of all of us, and still to this day, the highest. In Ireland, you're a poet, you're held in very high esteem. It's always been that way. For the locals to write a poem in praise of a Viking, he must have been a seriously good guy. He must have been seriously impressed with him. And they would barely write praise poetry for Irish leaders. And yet here they were doing it for this guy. So he must have been someone they really respected and looked up to. Dedicated to the Viking kings of Dublin became a very active element of the city's political scene. What is clear is that the popular picture of the Vikings is not as it seems. Right there, an academic after 1,000 years, you can get books from a few years ago. I watched documentaries on the Discovery Channel on the BBC, and the first thing they do, they talk about the Vikings, you see a guy with a sword. It's always that stereotype of the nasty guy. So it's clear that the popular picture of Vikings is not quite as it seems, and when viewed, their long-term presence is quite untrue. Quite untrue means it's false. So they were not barbarians. The communities were mutually transformed in the process because they both helped each other. Of course, there was plundering and pillaging. There was battles and there was war, but it happened on both sides. The Vikings were not any worse than anyone else. But those who started to build camps, that's patronising, I should really say cities and towns, started to settle and began interacting in a very different way. So the Vikings and the Norse people were model immigrants. They didn't come to start trouble, steal anything. They came to make friends and do business. Perfect. So how did they become portrayed by history as monsters? And this is where it gets really interesting. Okay, so I told you earlier on that when they built the city hall, new city hall, they buried the old Viking city. But when you want to really kill something, how you do it was with paper. How you do it was with history. They always say, those who win the wars write the histories. History, his story. And no one who ever lost history ever got to be the one who wrote about it. So, like how the Native American story in America is always told from the side of American presidents, this kind of thing. The winners, the losers never write the history. really. That's just a fact, okay? But history is his story. And so Viking control of Dublin finally ceased in 1171 when the city was captured by Leinster Anglo-Normans. Now I want to talk about the Normans because this is real good stuff for how we're controlled today. The Normans were Vikings, Norse people who had moved to France about 400 years previous. They were just like any other Nordic group, except one thing. They became Romanized. They moved into the Roman system. They became Christians, and they started to adopt Roman law. So you had, on one hand, all the Viking skill, technology, ability to sail, all this other stuff. On the other hand, they were representatives of Rome. This, I believe, was a very dangerous and very sad and tragic part in history. Because in 1066, William the Conqueror and the Normans, they were Christianized Vikings, basically, crossed the English Channel and they attacked the English at the Battle of Hastings, the Anglo-Saxon English. They defeated them, and Anglo-Saxon England, and also to an extent, ancient England, the England of the Britons, right back to the Romans, of the Celtic England, was all destroyed in one go. And the Normans, the first thing they did was, as soon as he was made King of England, William, he opened a blank book called the Doomsday Book. And what they wanted was the name of every single person in England. What age they were, what they had, who their family was, who they were related to, how many cattle they had, how many acres of land they had. And this was the beginning of the slave state that we live in today. That was it. To write down a law in any indigenous country is considered extremely sacrilegious. American Indian law is told through pictures. It's a tapestry. It's not written. It's just like the great spiritual traditions are never written. They're passed on oral. The Vedas are, 6,000 years old? And they're word for word perfect. They found the original manuscripts, maybe 10,000 years. Word of mouth is more honest. This is everything. No lawyer, well, I apologize to anyone who's a lawyer in the room. No lawyer will ever admit this. But the most valuable way to transmit information is through word of mouth. Because when you write it down, you can change it. That's when black magic comes in. So if you were to walk up to Native America and you were to say, we're going to write down your laws, they would have considered that the greatest blasphemy, the greatest act of evil. No, you never write a law down. Why don't you write a law down? Because then it can be changed. Now, I'll give you an example. I'm not off the tangent here, right? Everyone goes on about the American Constitution, the greatest document of freedom that was ever written, the American Constitution, right? The first line of the American Constitution is, we hold these beliefs sacred that all men are created equal and are given inalienable rights, meaning they have human rights, okay? And you say to yourself, that sounds great, right? Finally, my humanity is in a piece of paper that's legally protected. But the law works two ways. Once it's written down, it can also be taken away. It's no longer the law of nature that makes you have human rights and decency. It's the law of the land. And that began with the Normans arriving in England. They began with writing down, instead of like someone who was an Anglo-Saxon who had a big farm, my name is so-and-so, my father left me this farm, we work sheep, we work cows, how many acres of land do you have? I don't know, that field over there to the river. Here, what will your sons do? I'll do the same, and I'll leave it to them, and we're all very happy, it's been working great. How long has it been going on? Forever. And how long, okay, we're going to write this down. We're going to measure your land, we're going to count on the sheep, this is what the Normans did, we're going to count on the cattle, we're going to get name your son, his wife, his girlfriend, you're going to marry him, your neighbours and all this stuff. Okay, this is going in the Doomsday Books. Why? That money, when we invaded you, it was expensive. You're going to have to pay for it. So you invaded us, you captured our country, you caused a war, and you're making us pay for it? Yeah, what can you do? That's business. Don't take it personally. And then suddenly, what? And nothing you can do about it because the guy comes and shows up at your house. I've got the Doomsday Book here. Your name is Alfred of, Somerset. You owe me, you owe the king, 7 pieces of silver, 2 cows, and half that field's. It's half the potatoes in that field. Well, we pay potatoes there. Half the carrots in that field. Why? It's the law. What law? The Norman law. Says who? William the Conqueror. Prove it. Here's the book. And what happens is, Alfred dies, and his sons go, we kind of, maybe a good idea if we just did this because they're sending these soldiers over to hassle us, and that guy next door, he paid his taxes. Suddenly they're doing really well because they got a contract from the local military to supply them with cows. They're getting rich. Maybe we should. So the third generation, let's pay taxes. Why? It's the law. Black magic. Make you believe things that are just brand new ways of thinking that are based on nothing. We invade your country, you pay for it. If you don't, we show you the law, we prove the law exists. If you don't like it, we won't kill you, but hey, you might go out of business. Now, who else behaves like that? That's a protection racket. That's mafia. That's gangsters. You have a store, they knock on your window, they go into your store and you go, oh, it's a beautiful store. Oh, lovely produce. Be terrible if something happened to it, like a fire. That kind of a thing. Are you threatening me? Oh no. It would be terrible if it happened. If you give me so much of your profits, we'll be like an insurance company and we'll make sure this place never burns down, ever. Okay, you get the hint. And then they say, I'll tell you what, I'll buy those coats off you too while we're here. So it's like, that's gangsters. We're dealing with gangsters, that's who runs the world. And that began when the Normans invaded England first, and then invaded Ireland later on. I don't know, about 80 years later, and did the same. They opened up, we got our Doomsday Books. They went up to the local kings and chieftains and they said to them, let's do business. No. Okay, we'll kill you. Okay, let's, this kind of thing. And then let's got new laws, new charters. This is like you go to any royal family in the world, you can dig out a document. Why do you think the Vatican archives are the most... In the Vatican archives, they have documents that are so incredibly valuable that they're almost... because they're needed for all these things. Like how England became Protestant was Henry VIII wanted to divorce Anne Boleyn. The Pope said no, because you're Catholic, so he abolished the Catholic Church in England. The letters that he wrote to the Pope saying this are stored in the Vatican. You see, paper, the writing down of these things is what makes them powerful. Just a sheet of paper that's been signed and double signed, and this is how they came to control us. Did the Vikings, when they arrived in a place to do business, say, you must do business with us because we have a book that says you must do business? No, it was all very casual. Here's this, here's that, thanks, see you next year. By the way, can I have that house there, can I buy it? Yeah, here's some money. I want to open a shop. Yeah, here you go. Would you be interested in taking some of my ivory? That's great, I love it. Give my son a job. Isn't that how we should be doing business? When the Normans came along, because with Roman law and Roman rules, they had the book, the paper, the written down words, and that changed everything. So the Vikings is a story that sat on two levels. One, their real history was removed, and their beautiful spiritual tradition, which I'll talk about later, was removed. And that was so useful to us today. But also their story of how they were corrupted. Now we're never told the real evil of the Vikings was the Normans. We're told that who sold out to Rome. We're told that the real evil of the Vikings is the guys and they were actually ruthless. So when the Leinster Anglo-Normans, now Leinster is a kingdom in Ireland, on the east coast, and they formed an alliance with the Anglo-Normans. They were the English Norsemen who had sold out to the Pope. They attacked Dublin, and this was after Dublin had 300 years of Viking presence. Dublin was Scandinavian for longer than the United States has existed. And yet we were never told about this in school. It's like a little footnote. So the Vikings fought back. They came back with the help of Scottish mercenaries. Mostly they were from the Highlanders, but also Orkney Vikings. Shetland Vikings. And they led by the last Norse king of Dublin, Askal Mac Ragnar. Now that's what's important about this is his name is a mixture of Scandinavian and Irish mixed and spelled in the Irish language. So they were settled in completely. It was completely. They were getting married, they were having kids, they were living together as one. No problems. He was killed, and then the historians came in. Christian history, his story. And that's when they started to portray the Vikings all over Europe as monsters. As monsters. Because there was a very good reason for this. Because they wanted to destroy. You see, they knew they never could destroy the Vikings by force. But you can destroy them in books. So you write down that you can't kill them all. All you have to do is write down in a book the horror. And that's just like the law. The law says this, the book says that. And where does that go back to? The Bible, the Quran, and the Torah, the Middle Eastern books. People of books as they go. So, old European gods versus the Middle Eastern god. The portrayal of the Vikings from the Dark Ages. And the Dark Ages were anything but dark. The Dark Ages were beautiful. They were only bad for the Catholic Church because they were losing all their power to Islam in the East, and they were losing all their power to the Vikings in the West and around them. But the Dark Ages was otherwise a very. If you look at, I saw this graphic. I wish I had it. It showed the colours of the Dark Ages. That the clothes that they wore bright coloured clothes because they could make all these dyes from all these different fabrics. And yet, when the Dark Ages are portrayed in movies and shows, it's always somebody in a black cloak who's shivering and, tattered clothes. It was nothing like that at all. They dressed, our ancestors dressed in beautiful fabrics and clothes. And it was a time of great learning and great growth in science and everything, and understanding and shipbuilding, navigation, metalsmith. But it's only the Dark Ages because Rome lost its power in much of Europe and in the Middle East. And that's why they call it the Dark Ages. It was dark for them. It was great for us. Now, they were portrayed as brutal, vicious, psychopathic mass murderers and rapists. It's an old-fashioned propaganda, that's all it is, which the historical records do not simply support. There has never ever been a Viking site found anywhere that shows a massacre of civilians. Never. They have not found one town, one village, one place where all the Vikings had landed and all the locals were in a mass grave in the ground. It never happened. But in every movie ever made about it, what do they show you? They come into the beach and the women are screaming, running away with their babies. Still to this day. The Vikings were far less warlike than the Franks, who were on a Christian crusade to convert all of Europe and later the Middle East to Christianity, either by forced conversions or genocide. Now, the Franks were like this because they were representing the Roman law. The Roman law. They were carrying, they had the Roman symbols, and the whole thing was coming from Roman law, imperial law. One God, one rule, one emperor, do as we say, that's it, or we kill you. That's the end of it. And the fundamental thing of this was there's one God in heaven, and then there's one God on earth.